Welcome to the Practicing Drummer podcast. My name is Craig, and in this episode, I have a conversation with Steve Smith from August of 2025. For most of us, Steve Smith needs no introduction. He's simply one of the most influential drummers of our time. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for his work with Journey. He's also considered one of the top jazz and fusion drummers. He's led his own group, Vital Information, for more than 40 years. On top of all that, he's produced some of the best educational books and videos for drummers. I'm currently obsessed with the Brush video he did with Adam Nussbaum, where they sit down with Billy Hart, Eddie Locke, Joe Morello, Charlie Persip, and Ben Riley, who all demonstrate their technique and play along with the same set of tracks. It is incredible. Anyway, it's a huge deal that I got to talk to Steve. I've been a fan since I was a teenager. Before we get going, I want to give a big thanks to friend of the show, Scott Amendola, for connecting us, and of course I have to thank Steve for being so generous with his time. As always, I'll put links to everything we talk about in the show notes and on the blog at practicingdrummer.com. And with that, let's get right into it with Steve Smith. All right, Steve Smith, thank you so much for doing this.
Craig, my pleasure to be here. I like your podcast. I've been listening. It's very good. Good questions and really interesting interviews. So, yeah, I'm a fan.
Thank you for saying that. It's mind-blowing to me that you have listened, because I don't have the biggest audience, but to know that you listened is so encouraging. And I guess before we start, I have to thank Scott Amendola for connecting us.
Right.
I know you reached out to him after his episode, and when he told me that, again, it blew my mind. And he said, well, Steve might be willing to do this. I was like, okay, let's do this.
Cool.
So I got your Legends book out. I started reviewing all of your educational materials and listening to you. And so it's been months of Steve Smith for me as I've prepped for this.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for doing your homework. And that's great.
Yeah, of course. So, I have a bunch of questions for you. We'll jump around a lot.
Okay.
I'll try to keep it organized, but it might not be. And, I already mentioned this when we were emailing, you have such a history, and your time with Journey and Steps Ahead, and of course, Vital Information since the early 80s.
Right. 1983 is the first recording. Yes.
Right. And so all of that has been covered so much in Modern Drummer and podcasts. So I'm not going to go over all of that. There's no need to rehash that again. It's documented.
Agreed.
And I guess two things that come up to me when I think about how you fit into my life as a drummer. I think that I was first aware of you when I was around 12 years old, when the Journey video game for Atari came out.
Right.
Those games were so primitive back then, and every character on the screen just looked like a stick figure. But of course, they used the initials then for each member of the band. So, it was SP and NS and SS. I always got excited when your character would come up. I was like, ooh, that's the drummer. Cool. Because I was just getting into drums at that time.
Right on.
So it was very funny. And then
that is some funny stuff. Our manager at the Herbie Herbert, the Journey manager, he was just on top of anything and everything he could think of.
Oh, sure.
And so that was a interesting association. And, and it started with the little Atari game, but then it went to a Bally Midway game.
Oh, really? Yeah, I haven't played that one.
Yeah, and they only made about 50 of them, and it was fun. It was cool. I had one for a long time, and I sold it to a collector about 10 years ago, but it was, a big stand-up video game with Journey songs in it. Anyway, that was just a weird little side trip that we went on. Yeah.
And I think the first time I got serious about checking you out was, around the time your DCI videos came out.
Okay.
I specifically remember the second one, and where you were dealing with, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you used the Steps Ahead song called Oops, to demonstrate 5-note groupings.
Yeah, 5, like playing phrases of 5 over 4/4 time.
Yeah, right. And that was really inspiring for me, and I still think of that every single time that I do groups of 5 and 4/4 time.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And as I said, I did a lot of research here And I discovered some things that I had never checked out or hadn't checked out in a long time. But one of the things that I had not heard before was this group Yo Miles.
Right. Henry Kaiser.
Those recordings are so cool.
Yes. That was I think it was in 2000. And Henry Kaiser is a guitarist and a musical adventurer who comes up with concepts and projects. And that was one of his projects that he organized, and it was based on the music of Miles Davis from something like, I think, 1969 to 1975.
So like the Electric Miles.
The Electric Miles, exactly. And he had Wadada Leo Smith playing the part of Miles, and he did an amazing job with that. And then put together a rhythm section. It was Tom Coster on keyboards and Michael Manring on bass, Carl Peraza on percussion, and Zakir Hussain played on some of that. It was the first time I played with Zakir. And Greg Osby played alto, and John Chakai played tenor, and he actually played with Coltrane. I think he's on Ascension. And there was a few other people involved in that as well. But that was a trip. We spent about 5 days in a beautiful recording studio in Marin County, and we recorded a lot of the Miles Davis repertoire. And even in the Miles Electric years, he had a couple of incarnations of what that group sounded like. So I had 2 completely different drum sets. I had the small Sonar drum set with an 18-inch bass drum, because in the early years, Jack DeJohnette was the drummer.
Oh, yeah.
And so we did some of the tunes from that period, and I played, more or less in that style, like, On the Corner and Live at the Cellar Door and those kind of recordings. And then there was the Al Foster years with Michael Henderson on bass, so it was more rock funk oriented. And for that, I had a big Sonar kit, with a bigger bass drum. You got more of a rock sound. And I had seen that group with Al Foster in 1975, probably 74, at Paul's Mall in Boston.
Oh, nice.
And so it was a chance to really just witness very close, Pete Cozy and Reggie Lucas. I can't remember now if that was the guitarist, but it was pretty killer. And that was my first time seeing Al Foster live. So in my mind, he was like a rock drummer.
Yeah.
Because he played so authentically in that style, with the open hats and a really deep groove on the bass drum. He sounded something like, Buddy Miles to me, the way he played. And he had such a beautiful and unique approach to playing that kind of music that I actually, at some point, I wrote a Downbeat article about the jazz fusion style of Al Foster, because it was completely singular, where he would play these grooves that were somewhere between double time and half time. It was the way he'd phrase, go like, boom, ta, doom, ta, doom, doom, ta, doom, ka, doom, ka, doom, doom. So it wouldn't be halftime all the time, and it wouldn't be double time all the time. It would kind of go between the two, which opened up the feeling of what you could do. Because if it was double time the whole time, that kind of puts it in one zone, or halftime, no, that puts it in a zone. But he would come up with these really interesting grooves that were, somehow in between, which I found really interesting. So, I had already done a pretty deep dive into Electric Miles period. So that was, I think, a natural fit for me to play on that, and we recorded enough music to make 2 double CDs.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you sound cool. So great on that stuff. It's such a good fit.
Yeah, thank you. That was, and then years later, I got involved with a similar project called Electric Miles, which played a bunch of gigs in New York City with Randy Brecker and Jeremy Pelt on trumpets, with Lonnie Plaxico on bass, and then, various guitar players and keyboard players. So, so that was a natural fit. It's just, I love playing in that style, and I've, been into it enough that I feel really comfortable with it. And then I've used a lot of those concepts with Vital Information.
Oh, sure.
I borrowed that concept for some of the music.
Yeah, and since you just brought up Lonnie Plaxico, I noticed that he plays with you at on the Birdland gigs that you do.
Yes,
Coltrane
that's right.
Revisited, and then I saw a video where you were doing Bud Powell's music. And I know you have a couple gigs coming up in October, too.
Right.
I think you're doing a weekend of Bud Powell's music and then a weekend of Monk's music.
Right.
And are those gigs that you prepare for, or is this music and you've played with these people so much that you can
I have to do a lot of homework for those because we get a specific set list. So those gigs are organized by a producer named Milan Simic. And Milan used to be the manager of Steps Ahead.
Oh, okay,
yes. And he's produced a lot of jazz records. And he puts the bands together and he presents it to Birdland, like, let's do a Monk tribute and this will be the band. And Birdland says, sure. So in a way, like they hire him and then he hires us. And so he puts together the band and he even puts together the set list.
Oh,
so
wow.
He's very, very specific. And he does it for his own pleasure in a way, because he saw all these people. He's in his 80s and he saw Monk and he saw Bud Powell, and he wants to sort of like relive that feeling of being in the audience. And so he puts these bands together and it's like in his way, it's like coming up with the ideal set list. He does the Coltrane Revisited also. So he puts together every year a different set list, but it's very specific. So I go through and I learn the tunes. I play along to the records. And not that we play them exactly like the records, but it's similar. Like we'll play kind of the same tempos and get into what was happening at that time. And then, of course, we just do our own thing once we count the tune off.
Yeah.
But we have that framework to start with.
Mm-hmm.
So we all do our homework, but there's never any rehearsal.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Except for Friday night, the first set.
Sure. Right.
So, we get together, we do a sound check and, Friday afternoon, and then we'll run down a few of the heads, and not even all of them sometimes, just sort of the more challenging ones. And then we play and I put up some of those videos.
Yes.
And Steve Cardenas, I want to mention him because the guitarist, he did the Monk gig one year, and he's written an entire book on Monk tunes and he's transcribed the entire Monk catalog.
Oh, wow.
So that's a great way to learn those tunes, is to buy his book. And I think it's called the Thelonious Monk Fake Book.
Oh, yeah, I have that one. Okay, I didn't put it together that was him, but right.
Yeah. And so of course I bought that and I used that, because those are pretty accurate, and those are the charts we use for the Monk gig. And, and I was just talking to Greg Bissonette about this recently, like we're talking about, playing all these different tunes, and we're talking about hard tunes, and one of them I brought up was Brilliant Corners. I think that's the name of it. Ba-do-da-da, this one.
Oh yeah,
and
for sure.
And it's kind of and it's very weird. Okay, here's what we were talking about: drummers that solo over the form.
Oh sure, okay.
And somehow we had a discussion about like Max Roach. Well, he really played over the form. Buddy Rich, no, he didn't really play over the form. He did his own thing. And I said, like, there's this tune that Max soloed over, and and I know what it's like because I played that tune live, and it's got a 7-bar bridge, and then it's like AABA, and then the last A, the first time is 7 bars, and then the second time it's 8 bars. And the first time you play the tune, it's in a slow tempo, and then right away you play the whole song again in double time.
Yeah.
And to solo over it, it's very challenging to keep the form exactly the form.
Oh, sure.
And even on the record, I think Max he's a little bit off, but nevertheless, it's still amazing. So that's the kind of homework, sometimes it's very difficult, but I love doing it because it expands my knowledge and things that I know, music that I wouldn't have played unless I was in these kind of specific situations. So
Yeah.
it's pretty great, pretty fun. And I'm thrilled that I get these calls to do that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. And another cool thing I noticed in one of the videos, you were playing a pretty small bop kit.
Yes. Most of the time when I play at Birdland, and I play a small kit with an 18-inch bass drum, 1 rack tom, and 2 floor toms.
Does that change how does that feel for you? Because you play so much on your, it's not a signature kit, but, you have your...
Actually, I do have a signature kit.
You do?
Yeah, it's the 30th anniversary. It's the Sonor 30th anniversary kit.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
And it's came out in 2007. That was my 30th anniversary with Sonor.
Oh, man. Yeah. How did I miss that?
Yeah, they made 100 of them.
Oh, so cool.
I'll send you a video. There is a video of me doing a world tour that year for Sonor. I did 50 clinics around the world, and each drum shop that I did a clinic in had to buy one of my kits.
Oh, okay.
So I played 50 of them in 1 year.
Wow, amazing.
And so that was, so it's a 20-inch bass drum, 3 rack toms, and 2 floor toms.
Okay.
But then, since then, I've expanded it to 3 floor toms and 3 snare drums.
Yeah.
So just to address your question about what is it like to play the small kit, that's totally comfortable for me because I, of course, came up playing a traditional drum set with 1 rack tom and 1 floor tom, 20-inch bass drum. And then when I was going to Berkeley, I had a little Gretsch kit with an 18-inch bass drum, kind of exactly a Tony Williams or Elvin Jones, Max Roach kind of Gretsch kit. And so I'm super comfortable with that. And it's my recommendation for drummers to learn on a kit like that.
Sure.
Because even when I play the big kit, I still see that configuration in a way as a starting point for, for what I do. And then it's expanded from there. And then when I got my first Sonor kit in 77, that was a directive of Jean-Luc Ponty, who wanted me to have a big double bass kit.
Right.
So I started to get more comfortable with the 3 rack toms and 2 floor toms. And then that became something that was really comfortable for many years. And then in 2016, I added the 3rd floor tom, which again it opened up just another little door of possibilities, tonal possibilities.
Yeah, I love the 3 floor tom setup and your playing of them too. Sometimes, when people have those, there's one that's ignored because it's out of reach or something. And you do a really wonderful job of using all of the voices on your kit.
Well, I've worked on, so many combinations of how to play the toms, and maybe we could talk about that in a minute, but just to circle back around. So now I've gone back to, for the most part, playing a smaller kit just this year. And so if you've seen, there's some videos recently posted by Sonor to celebrate this 150th anniversary. So this year, 2025, is the 150th anniversary of Sonor. And they had me record some solos and some playing to tracks at a studio in Rhinebeck, New York, which is near Woodstock. And I used my vintage kit. So it's rather a new Sonor kit, but it's the vintage kit.
Is that the white one or the marine pearl? Yeah, right.
It's like marine pearl white with an 18-inch bass drum and 1 12-inch rack tom and a 14/16 floor tom.
Yeah.
So I use that, and I love playing that kit. And when Vital Information, just recently we did an East Coast tour, I used that kit on the tour, which started at Birdland and then toured around the Northeast. And then we went into a studio, we recorded for 2 days. So we've actually gotten 7 tunes recorded for yet another album using that kit.
Oh, cool.
So it's just really fun and interesting, and I'm just changing it up for now and you can see this little kit that I'm practicing on is that setup, with
nice.
3 ride cymbals and bass drum, rack tom, 2 floors and 2 snares, instead of 3.
Yeah, right. Another thing that I noticed along with the various amounts of toms that you use and the different kit configurations, it seems to me that over the last, 5 years or so that you've pared down the amount of cymbals you use.
That's true. Yeah. Essentially, I stopped using crash cymbals and splash cymbals.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. And I found with the touring, with the Vital Information group as a trio, piano, keyboards, bass, drums with Manuel Valera on keyboards and Yannick Guizdala on bass.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. Great players. Yeah, the crash cymbals just are kind of annoying in these smaller rooms, and playing at Birdland, I don't need them, and the splash is kind of fun, but I don't know, I just don't hear it at this point right now. And on the other side of things, I incorporated a gong for a long time.
Oh, right.
And that was kind of fun, but using it like a gigantic ride cymbal.
Yeah.
And so that was. It was something that was super fun, and I haven't been doing this year. I haven't been doing it. But with 3 ride cymbals, if I need a crash, I just crash on one of the rides, which works totally fine. But one of the reasons I stopped using crash cymbals is it has to do with keeping the time moving without so many points of punctuations that sort of stops and then starts again. Meaning like I'm not so needing to play, here's one. Or here's a big fill and now I'm going to let you know, like top of the tune is here.
Yeah.
And I play with people that are very self-contained, meaning they don't need a lot of clarity as far as me outlining the form. I'm playing the form and I know where I am, but they know where they are too.
Right.
And so some of the reasons people use crash cymbals is to say, here's one, or, here's the end of a phrase. And I'll play ends, phrasing and end the phrase, but I don't need a big one. You can really hear that when we did an album, Vital Information did an album called Prayer for the Generations. And it was a completely improvised album with George Garzone playing with us. And you can really hear like the music develops and there's ones here and there, but there's no big crashes. It's just the time keeps going. So that's the concept of it. Like that's what I'm thinking of. And then there's, the idea that a crash is kind of disruptive to the stage volume as well.
That makes sense.
So, yeah. So, and I want to mention all of those tunes that we did with George Garzone are on YouTube in videos as well.
Right.
So we filmed the whole session.
Yeah, and that's something that I want to talk about and go back to talk about how you first started working with George in just a minute. But since we're talking about ride cymbals, I have maybe it's a trivial question, maybe not, but I noticed a couple of times in the current iteration of Vital Information, when you're playing with a trio, that you will play time on 2 ride cymbals simultaneously.
Right.
I first saw that, I think you did that streaming concert at Hitkor, Hitkor. This spring or winter, and I saw it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I started thinking, oh, maybe it's a showmanship kind of thing because you do some things like that. But then when I listened back to it, it really filled up the sound too, and it gave a bigger beat. Can you talk about why you started doing that?
Why I started doing it was I was working on match grip because I've been a traditional grip player from the beginning. And when I decided I wanted to develop more match grip playing, I realized that my right hand was pretty highly developed and used a lot of different embouchures, a lot of different positions, how I played the ride cymbal, especially. Most of my right hand technique I can trace back to just playing the ride beat for years. And so I thought, okay, let me just try that with the left hand. And the way that I worked on it was to put up a mirror and try to get my left hand to look exactly like my right hand playing the ride cymbal.
Okay, sure.
And there's a couple different versions of playing the ride cymbal. Sometimes I play the ride cymbal with the palm down, more like you would see Buddy Rich play a ride cymbal. And then other times it would be with the thumb up, more like you'd see Jack DeJohnette play the ride cymbal.
Right.
So there's various ways of approaching it. So I worked on, all these different ways of playing the ride cymbal with both hands. And I like the sound of it. And it's a really great practice technique also. So sometimes I like to start my practicing of the day doing that, just playing, like feathering the bass drum, playing, 2 and 4 on the hi-hat, and just playing time with both hands just to, get into a nice swing pulse. So I find a really nice practice technique, because most of what I work on, I want it to be in the swing domain, to really feel good and swing and be in time and have clarity. I don't often work on, let's say, straight eighth feels.
Oh, sure.
I mostly work, when it comes to my practicing, with like straight ahead. And it's a really great way to start for me. So that's where that came from. And then I use it occasionally on the gig, because it does creates a whole different feeling to be that, strong with the 2 ride cymbals and not playing the snare drum.
Right.
Just playing the cymbals. So yeah, I find it is pretty cool, pretty fun, and sounds good and feels good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Since we're talking about practicing a little bit in your left hand, did you ever, when you were trying to get your match grip together, did you ever practice on a left-handed kit?
No, I have not played on a left-handed kit, but I worked on playing open-handed.
Oh, sure. Yes.
And playing, coordination with the left hand on the ride cymbal and the right hand on the snare drum.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we get too far away from talking about the Birdland gigs and Monk's music, you mentioned Max Roach's soloing. And one thing that I saw somewhere, maybe in a Modern Drummer interview, is that you said that you got to spend a day with Max Roach.
Yes.
And I don't remember seeing any other context around that. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what stuck with you?
Yeah, sure. Okay. It was in 1997, and I have a friend, Sid, who ran the drum department at Guitar Center in San Jose. And Sid had hired Max to do a drum clinic at the Guitar Center in San Jose.
Wow.
He's pretty adventurous. He got Tony Williams to do a clinic there.
Amazing.
In 1995. And he asked me to be the opening act for Tony. And unfortunately for me, I was involved with this Journey reunion album called Trial by Fire.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to sign this pretty onerous contract that I would not do anything else other than Journey for the time of that recording cycle. So I could not do it. And Greg Bissonette did it. Bissonette got to do it. And then when Sid Thompson got Max to do a clinic, he asked me to come and introduce Max. So by 1997, I was out of that contract.
Sure. Okay.
So I didn't, I wasn't there to play, but I was there to introduce Max. So the sequence of events is Max played at Yoshi's the night before with his group. And I went and hung out with him there. I got to know his assistant, Prince LaShaw, I think was his name, and then hung out a little that night with Max. And then the next day, I went to the Guitar Center, and the idea of me introducing Max was, here's a drummer that a lot of you young people have heard of, but you maybe don't know why you've heard of him, what his contribution has been. So it's like I introduced him in a way of like a history lesson about him. And I got to hang out with him before the clinic started, just in a back room, and it would have been like somebody's lesson room or practice room, And during that time, I talked to him and I told him that I was playing for Big Sid. I learned the Drum Also Waltzes, Drums Unlimited, and Mr. Hi-Hat.
Right.
I learned a lot of his repertoire. and was playing it on my own clinics. And then I was inspired because I saw Max do a solo drum set concert some years before at SF Jazz, which was kind of mind-blowing to me. It was like a 1-hour concert of just drums, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
So I told him all that stuff, and he was very nice and, a real gentleman. And then he went on stage and did his clinic. Now, his clinic wasn't really a clinic. It was a solo drum set performance. So he played a lot of his repertoire. And in the middle of it, he introduced Mr. Hi-Hat, and he goes, and tonight we have a special guest who's going to play Mr. Hi-Hat for you. And he called me up on the stage. And so I was sitting right in the front row, and he handed me the sticks.
Oh, my gosh.
And so luckily he didn't tell me beforehand, because I would have been so nervous.
Right.
But I just got up on stage, and he was sitting like 2 feet away from me. And I played Mr. Hi-Hat, for the whole audience and for him. And it was a little tricky because his cymbals were like, I think it was a 14-inch bottom and a 13-inch top.
Right.
So it was a little weird. But I did it. And I did my thing of what a lot of the way he played it, but then I added all these tricks and things to it, and then I just did my whole routine. And when it was over, he leaned over and he goes, "You added some shit to it." But he was super cool, and then I sat down and he carried on. So that was it. It was quite an exciting day, and it was just great to hang with him like that. So it was a real thrill. And there's a few pictures of him and I posing together.
Oh, cool.
That I have. And I got a poster. His guy, Prince Lachey, was selling posters. So I bought a poster and he signed it, so I have it on my wall.
Oh, cool.
And so, and he gave me the sticks too. I have the sticks.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to get back to George Garzone, and this is something that Scott Amendola kind of put in my ear months ago to ask you about, and that's the group The Fringe.
Right.
And playing what essentially is free jazz. I think would be a good way to describe it. I was curious how the gig came up, and then how you prepared for that, even, whether before the gig or... From my understanding is that when you go into new situations, you become a deep study and you do a lot of preparation. And I'm curious what that was like for you at that time, or if it was like that at all. Okay.
And with The Fringe, there was no preparation or anything. It was when I was a student at Berklee. And I went to Berklee I started in 1972.
Right.
And I went, for like 73, 74. I took a little time off and then went back. And then I was living in Boston. So during that time, I was doing all kinds of different gigs, but I was playing with the bass player of The Fringe at that time was Rich Appleman. It was before John Lockwood. I was playing with John Lockwood. He was in Boston. I did a lot of gigs with him and Rich Appleman, who was the head of the bass department at that time at Berklee. And I had played with George in a variety of situations. There's I have this really great picture of George and I posing with this group called Beard Hearsey in the Year of the Ear. And we played with him. And so, I'd been playing with George and sometimes I sat in with his group called the Golden Chords. It was a wedding group. So he was doing every kind of thing like all of us were doing.
Yeah.
Just playing gigs.
Yep.
Like you were talking about in Boston, like top 40 gigs, I was doing that too. So playing with George was fun and it was very free. And it wasn't even being hired to play a gig at first. It was just, let's get together and play. And we'd go into a room and they'd smoke pot. I mean, I don't think I smoked pot. I was never really a big pot smoker. I tried it and didn't like it. But, that was the thing. And get high, turn off the lights, and go nuts. And so that was The Fringe. That was like, in a way, and it was playing super fast. Like, how fast can we play? In a way, you were playing yourself into an altered state. And that was the idea of it. And if you think about, and I mentioned this in a moment of this, Musora and Drumeo,
yes.
I did this Musora thing covers, where they ask you to play a tune and come up with an arrangement.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talked about, and I mentioned, I come from a generation where we were using music to transcend time and space.
Right.
And I didn't get to really develop that. I did, but they didn't put it in there. And what the idea is, if you think about what John Coltrane was doing when he was playing, and especially when it got to like a Love Supreme and One Down and One Up, and those, the reason that you play so long in a way is for entrainment, that word entrainment, where, Mickey Hart writes about this, like it takes about 10 minutes to get into this space. And then with that kind of playing, you're really trying to get into like transcending time and space, kind of an altered state, which, drugs can be a part of it. But, that wasn't, for me, that wasn't a part of it. It's just the playing where you want to get into this zone.
Yeah.
And so that's what this, with playing with the Fringe is about, from my perspective. It was just getting into this place of transcendence. And so we did live gigs too. I mean, we played gigs, and Bob Galati was the drummer. It was his gig.
Right.
But he was on some kind of long tour playing, and I don't know who he was playing with, but he was out of town for 1 year a lot. So I did some gigs. One of my students at the time, Louis D'Andrade, who ended up moving to Tokyo to work with Sadao Watanabe, he ended up doing some gigs. So it was a bit of a rotating drum chair. But the main feature was you just took it out and were in the moment. Yeah. And there really wasn't anything to prepare for.
Sure.
And there were some heads, like, okay, play the head and then go out.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was in time, sometimes it was no time. It was like very, very free.
And do you remember at all what you were hanging on to during those performances with regard to, how you were trying to guide your own playing and reactions to what was going on? Or were you ever taking the lead?
Just listening and responding and just being in the moment. It's interesting that you bring that up and get it, because it's not like preparing for those Birdland gigs or anything like that.
Right.
It was very different. And like how I can bring another connection to that. After we did the Yo Miles recording, I played a duo gig with Wadada Leo Smith. So that in some ways is closer to like the Fringe kind of playing.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's very into this free jazz kind of playing. And he really gave me some visualizations. Like he said, I want you to play, and he'd give me these charts, and the charts look like artwork. It was like a kind of a graph, and it said, and there would be like a scribble with play this density for a minute, and then there would be like a thin line that would go down and up, or it was very abstract, and you had to like look at it and imagine how long you were playing and then listen to him and respond. But he didn't want a lot of time, and he wanted to feel like the drums were like a waterfall, trickling down a mountain, and just give him some feeling of momentum underneath what he was doing. So that was like a directive from him. So it's not about playing time. It's about creating an atmosphere and just having some sense of motion in the playing.
Are there recordings of those duo gigs out?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
How about the Fringe? Do you have any recordings from those gigs?
No recordings of the Fringe. No.
Okay.
They're in the ether.
Yes, yeah. Maybe that's how they should be. Yeah, I'm sure it was awesome.
It was totally fun.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. Okay, since we're talking about prepping for gigs, and one thing that I did want to touch on, when you go out on tour with Vital Information, I'm curious what the prep is like for you, with regard to, are you kind of fixing the set lists in advance so you have a set of tunes that you want to work on in Shed? And are you maybe also coming up with like a concept or an approach that you're trying to carry through a certain tour? And then finally, just the physical preparation that you have to do, because touring itself, aside from playing 90 minutes a night, is taxing.
We I do have a list of tunes that we're going to play, and it's related to whatever our latest album is. And it will be roughly in a set list. And I practice those tunes quite specifically before the tour. I play along with my own recordings. I do have quite a few of the tunes mixed without drums.
Oh, sure.
So I can play along to it.
Yeah.
A lot of the music that we've recorded, we've used a click track. So I can do that. Not all the tunes, but, a fair amount of them. It made the recordings go easier. We're all super comfortable with that. So we can just set the tempo and then, do a few takes, and occasionally we'll edit take, first part of this take to that second part of that take. And I can do drum clinics and drum shows and play along with that music, which you can hear me do on some of those Sonar videos. I made some 2 years ago at the Sonar Factory, and then I made some recently at the studio in Rhinebeck where I played along with the New Perspective album. So, I have that to work with. So I get myself ready physically to play the music. And we have quite a few tunes to choose from, and it'll be maybe 15 songs. But when it gets down to it, the set starts to evolve as we start playing, and it gets narrowed down to maybe 12 tunes. Mm-hmm. And once we get a great set, we pretty much keep it with occasional changes. And those changes will be adjusting it for the different venues that we're playing and what will seem appropriate for the first song. Sometimes, we like to come out and start real strong with a bang.
Sure.
But then if you're playing in a really small, intimate club, that'll be too much.
Yes.
So we'll start slower and then we'll develop to that point. So, we make these kind of choices. Pretty much I set the set list, but the other guys do have input. It's not a total democracy, but it's mostly a democracy.
Right.
So I get myself ready for it. And to do that, I practice the tunes for a few weeks before. So they're super comfortable and second nature. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be reading music. And when we make a new record, I am reading while we're recording. Oh, but then I want to memorize the music.
Yeah.
The other guys don't memorize the music. They continue to read. I don't insist that they memorize it.
Sure.
But, and some of the tunes, they're sophisticated enough where they feel like they need to read them every night. But I want to memorize them. And then I'm practicing the tunes so I have a whole lot of freedom of interpretation.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happens with this music is there's drum solos in various parts of the songs, different, not every song, but, and I want to be able to address those solos and play different ideas every night. So that gives me a lot of direction and focus for my practice sessions to develop vocabulary in specific time signatures or tempos and things like that.
And are you thinking before you hit every night? Are you thinking about what your solo concept might be on certain tunes, or do you just let it come out?
I let it come out, except for there's a tune that I might be having a little bit of trouble with. I may, focus and narrow down certain ideas. For instance, we do, one of the tunes we played a lot for the first couple of years is called 8+5, which is this tune in 13.
Right.
And it's got a very difficult drum solo section because it's in 13, but it goes through 3 versions of 13 throughout the solo. Mm-hmm. And so, that's something that sometimes I would really focus. I'm going to try this tonight.
Oh, okay.
Then I come up with a thing and try it. And in a way, that's a technique of expanding. For me, expanding my vocabulary is being really specific. I'm going to try this tonight. And it's like finding a way to try it that feels natural and is not forced, but yet it's still preconceived that I'm going to try this idea in this place. And, in some ways that kind of training comes from the Indian training, because even though Indian music has a lot of improvisation, there is quite a bit of composition in the music as well. And then there's this fine line between your improvising and then you play a composition in the middle of your improvisation.
Sure.
And so it's not that foreign to me now. And I'm successful for the most part at doing it. And then after a while, that new idea that I decided I'm going to do one night actually then becomes just a easy thing that I can go into or come out of, and it's second nature after a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of gets to one question I have about your practicing that I don't want to forget to ask about. When you are working on a new phrase or a new idea in your practice routine, you've talked a lot about how you work up ideas and you'll start slow and lots of repetition.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is how you go from that type of practicing to actually integrating the new phrase into your playing, and also how you work on connecting the new ideas.
Well, actually, like so much of my practicing in the last couple of years is in some ways practicing improvising, like I'll spend some time doing what you're saying, like the ideas that I wrote about in that Guide to Practicing,
yes,
the Art of Practice, from my Hudson DVD, Drum Set Technique History of the U.S. Beat. I have this which came out in 2002, and I, sent it to you the other day, that PDF, and it's still pretty relevant, all those concepts. But then there'll be periods and sometimes days where I don't work on anything exactly specific, but just being comfortable playing and really being in the moment and allowing one idea to flow and to the next idea, to the next idea. And in a way, it's practicing improvising. So I'll give myself a form. Sometimes I give, stuff like a real clear AABA form or a blues form and a particular tempo. Sometimes I do it with a click. Other times I don't. But the idea is to flow and to not stumble, not have hesitations, just somehow go from one idea to the next and play unaccompanied music on the drum set as one would play a piano, as one would play a solo instrument. So like, what is that? It's soloing, but it's also in time enough that if a bass player was playing with me, the bass player would have an easy time playing with me.
Sure.
So that's like a lot of what I'm thinking about while I'm practicing is getting into that flow state and connecting all these ideas one to the next.
And if you get hung up on something, do you find it effective to stop and then figure out where you got hung up, or is it more beneficial to power through so that becomes more of so you have a little more confidence when improvising that you're not going to stop?
Yeah, I think sometimes I stop if I stumble upon something that I find, wow, that's really different and new and interesting, then I may stop and figure out what it is.
Oh, okay. And
then work on that for a while. But as soon as I can try to work it into the flow. That's an important concept for me as of late, especially. Because I don't want to say I'm just a totally improvising player. I'm not. Like, I come up with parts. I come up with,
Sure,
compositional drum parts that make a tune work.
Mm-hmm.
But then improvisation is super important to me, and how I can play in creative and surprising ways night after night after night.
Sure.
Which I've been doing my whole playing career, but I guess I'm more conscious of it now than I've ever been.
Another practicing concept that I want to touch on that I think I read an interview where you were talking about this is practicing from the bottom up.
It's really about having so much of what I play feel like it's deeply rooted from the bass drum up. And that is, when one feels the time from a drummer, what feels the best is if it's like that the time feel is coming from underneath. And even though in the jazz world, the ride cymbal is in many ways the dominant voice of the drum set, and then you make adjustments of the other limbs from there, there is a sense that you want it to feel like it's coming from, the bottom.
Yeah.
And it feels super comfortable from the bottom. So a big part of that is playing the bass drum and really getting comfortable playing the bass drum and having a good bass drum technique. And as far as jazz goes, I want to say, like, I call it my bass drum, the bass drum, not a kick drum, because I feel like that's kind of a different instrument in a way. The kick drum, in my vocabulary, that's a drum with a pillow in it, a hole in the front head.
Yeah, right.
And that's a very different instrument than a bass drum with two heads and just felt strip,
right,
or no muffling, or just felt strip muffling. And it takes a lot to really know how to play a bass drum.
Oh yeah, it's no joke to learn how to feather. Even though the concept seems easy, but it's not, and to get it up to speed is something too. And I saw on the Brush DVD that you did, I was really glad that they pulled back and did a side angle of you during your segment, and I think you were still feathering at the 320 tempo.
Yeah, and I've worked on that, really worked on that. And so that's in some ways what I'm talking about, coming from the bottom up, that it's a feeling. But technically you can look at it as like being really comfortable with the bass drum and how it works into your overall playing. Like lately I've been listening and I'm working with the playing of Jack DeJohnette. And he's one of the greatest examples of that for me, because his time playing is so uniquely tied to how his ride cymbal and bass drum works together. And then there's a conversation between the bass drum and the snare drum. So it's not like cymbal is playing and then there's, figures underneath it.
Yeah.
The cymbal is very organically connected to the bass drum. And I love that. Like, that's one thing. I love so many factors of Jack's playing, but that's one, very unique kind of concept that he uses. So he's to me a great example of, a bottom up player. Though all the greatest drummers really have that deep rooted feeling of, coming from underneath.
Yeah. One more thing I want to ask about your practicing is how you organize your practice time and kind of keep track of what you're working on. Specifically around things that take a long time to get together, like, say, the bass drum technique that Freddie Gruber showed you, which is the continuous release, something like that.
Constant release.
But it could be anything, that's going to take months to develop. I'm curious how you organize your practice time and then maintain focus on something that you're chipping away at so you don't get distracted every week and never actually end up getting something together.
Right. Practicing the same ideas day after day is something that I do because I know I'm going to get results with that. So, and I may spend hours practicing something like that, or I might just, touch on it for a little while each day, trusting the process, trusting that eventually it's going to feel easy and I'll be able to do it. I don't force things. I try not to force things and to remain relaxed while practicing. And I'm not always successful at that, but that's my goal. And I do have this idea that some things are going to take a really long time, months or even years.
Yeah.
And so I'll allow that to happen.
And are you tracking those and journaling at all?
No, I don't. I've tried that and I've done that a little bit. And it's, I think it's legit, but I haven't really done that. And because I go out and I play.
Sure, right.
And then while I'm doing the gigs, I might still be, trying to work certain things in. And other times I may forget about those things and just be in the moment of playing the music.
Yeah.
And then when I come back, a lot of times I have new things that I want to work on because different ideas came up during a tour or during, a series of gigs. So, and I will work on those things. I want to, bring up this idea that my practicing got to new levels when I would do post-gig practicing. So there's like preparing for gigs.
Yes.
And practicing and getting ready to play the gigs. But I've also found a lot of benefit in that while I was doing a certain gig, even if I didn't do it again, but I was presented with certain ideas that I wanted to develop, something I had trouble with, whatever it might be, then I'll practice those ideas. And that expands my vocabulary and has helped me become a better musician. And so that's it's an idea that came to me. It's like, I just did this gig and I had trouble with this, and this. So I'm going to work on that, even though it's not preparing to do the gig again.
Before we move on I want to talk about Indian music a little bit here too. But before we move on, I have a couple other questions in the vital information area that I wanted to ask you about. One, I'm curious what it's like for you playing the Journey tunes now with Vital Information. I know right. I've heard in interviews that, you had some resistance at first and right. Then you were brought in some arrangements that you quite liked. And I'm wondering how that experience has been for you. Does it feel like satisfying or like a full circle moment kind of for you? Or is it still something you feel a little cautious about?
Initially, the idea was brought up by Manuel and Yannick,
right.
my two new members of Vital Information, which I, wasn't open to. But they came up with such good arrangements of Open Arms, Who's Crying Now, and Don't Stop Believing that we started playing them. We recorded them. In fact, like Manuel came up with a Separate Ways arrangement that we just recorded in 5/4 for the most.
Oh wow!
And they're really interesting. So the way I see them is they're in some ways they're so far away from the Journey originals. They're like different tunes.
Yeah, you're not doing covers.
No. And so they're really different. And it's pleasing to me that I can, play these tunes and the audience is appreciating it.
Oh, sure.
So they're appreciating it for the jazz rock fusion tune that it is. And they're also, for the most part, appreciating that it's a Journey tune that they know.
Yeah, right.
So it's working really well. It's really feels, it's fun. Is the best way I can put it.
Okay, that's cool. And then the last thing I wanted to ask, since you've been a band leader now since 83 with Vital Information, do you have a sense of how you have changed as a band leader over time, if you feel like you've changed at all?
I don't know. That's a good question if I've changed. I mean, my originally, the original lineup of Vital Information from, the very first few albums, I was the leader, but it was more of a collaboration between myself and the bass player, Tim Landers, and the sax player, David Wilczewski, because the three of us knew each other from our high school years. And that's like the back, sort of the genesis of Vital Information, is that the three of us did a lot of playing together. We met playing in a local big band when we were in high school. We didn't go to high school together. We lived in different towns, but we played in this one big band. And then we just stayed in touch and played a lot of gigs. So I wrote tunes and Tim wrote tunes and Dave wrote tunes. So when you listen to those first couple of Vital Information records, it's the three of us and our tunes. And then eventually they moved on and did other things, and then I had other players come into the band. And what I've always looked for are players that contribute not only great playing, but writing as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so in that way, I've released, in some ways, I used to write tunes, and I actually stopped writing complete tunes quite a few years ago because it just was too hard after a while, because I'm not that great a piano player, and it was like my keyboard technique was hard to, and that's the way I did. I'd write a tune on the piano and, pencil to paper and write it out and bring it in. And I stopped doing it like that. And then I came up with let's reintroduce how we used to write songs with Journey in a way. Like we'd get in a room and we'd jam.
Yeah.
And so then, and when I was if we go back to the time of Frank Gambale and Jeff Andrews and Tom Coster and myself, that's like in the early 90s, we started writing like that. And I'd come up like, with a cool drum groove and then everyone would come up with a part. That's continues to this day. That's like one aspect of how we write. And then the other guys will bring in tunes. So in a way, I haven't really changed as far as I'm a good collaborator, and I want other musicians in a band that are good collaborators and that contribute to the repertoire. And each incarnation of Vital Information has its own repertoire.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I think in some ways then you could say I haven't really changed that much as a band leader. I organize the groups, I produce the records, and then I book the tours with my agent, Janet Williamson, and then we go out and play, and everyone feels like they're part of the band.
Yeah, and that's a sense I get, especially with the new trio, is that it just seems like you have a really good band dynamic, and that was really fun. Yeah, and I'm sure you did with the other versions of Vital Information.
Absolutely, like we all always, it was always like that. Yeah,
but it was really fun in that video you did where you guys worked on an arrangement of Black Hole Sun, to see you kind of working in real time, figuring it out, right. Struggling, doing retakes, this kind of thing. It was really cool. One last Vital Information thing I wanted to touch on is that I couldn't help but notice that going back to watch some of the videos of you playing with Hiromi and Anthony Jackson were so fun, and everybody was just like, kind of, as you've referred to, self-contained. It seemed like you could all just play the tunes.
They didn't need any ones, even if we were playing in an odd time and soloing. It was like it just kept going and going. And both Anthony and Hiromi were so comfortable with that. It's like I had to let go of always trying to be super clear, like, we're 9 and here's 1. Yeah. They didn't need it at all. Yeah. So
it's amazing.
It helped me let go of it too.
Yeah. And so it made me wonder if that trio format at all inspired the trio format you have now with Vital Information.
I say it did. Yes. There wasn't a direct line to it, but that was so powerful with an electric bass, right? Because I do like, with Vital Information, I do like having an electric bass versus an acoustic bass, for the sound factor, for just like we play with a lot of dynamics, but it gives us the option to play louder than, and me the option to play a little louder than if I had only an acoustic bass player. Yeah. Though when Larry Grenadier was in the band, I was able to do that. Oh, sure. That was a pretty unique situation. Yeah, he was such a powerful acoustic bass player. But that felt really great playing with Hiromi, and that trio was super potent, powerful. Yeah. But then we kind of came to it in a more natural way with Vital Information. And unfortunately, due to certain health issues, our guitarist at the time, Vinny, went through a health issue that he's, recovered from, but he couldn't make a trip to Australia that we had booked. So I went with Manuel, and our bass player, and my bass player, Baron Brown, had a health issue and he couldn't make it. It was like the whole band but Manuel and I went to Australia. We found a very good local bass player in Melbourne, Kim May, and we played a week at Bird's Basement as a trio in 2020. It was in March 2020, essentially, like right as COVID was happening. But during that week, Manuel had an acoustic piano and he had some synths, and we played the music without a guitar, and it sounded really good. He was able to play all the parts, and that was the first time I had ever tried that, and it was kind of a revelation. Yeah, this sounds really good as a trio. With Manuel playing, he's pulling it off. Yeah. So after the whole COVID thing, and I put the band back together because Yannick had come on board when we did that concert for Drumeo. Oh, right. That was in late February 2020. And Manuel and Vinny was at that concert. And it was like a week later that we went to Australia and Vinny didn't
Yeah.
go. And then it turned into a trio after that. So, like I say, I was inspired by the Hiromi trio, but then we got to it in this other way where, okay, this is totally working as a trio.
Yeah, that's so cool. Okay, I want to shift gears if you have a little bit more time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I can't talk to you without talking about Indian music and the influence that's had on your life and your playing. And I'll just say up front, I'm fairly naive when it comes to this topic. So hearing you talk will be great. But I do have one question that I haven't been able to find a satisfying answer for. When you talk about the conical, can you first describe what conical is? And then what I'm curious about, is that something that is primarily used as a method of learning and practicing that some people, including yourself, will incorporate into music? Or is it using the voice as an instrument on its own in some way? And, I struggle with even knowing how to best phrase that question, but does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, conical is its own standalone art form, the vocal tradition of reciting rhythms using syllables. But it comes from, to the best of my knowledge, from the repertoire of the South Indian drums, like mridangam, ghatam, and kanjira. So the syllables are more specific for South India and not North India. Those would be different syllables that you would recite if you played the tabla.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But the conical syllables come from, I think, grounded in the South Indian drums. But they do stand alone as their own vocal art form. And there has been, some great conical artists that really, in a way, just focus on that.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah. There's a drummer you've heard of Viku Vinayakram.
Yeah.
The Ghatam player that was in Shakti for many years. His brother, Subhash, was known as a conical artist. And now Viku's son, Selva Ganesh, really does focus a lot on conical himself.
Okay.
And his brother, Mahesh, who is an incredible singer, he also is really great at conical. So there are a lot of people, that are very good simply at conical. Pete Lockett, for example, is amazing at it. And my introduction to playing the rhythms of India come from going to a class where the teacher played another South Indian drum called Tavil, Tavil, Tavil. And that's a drum that's a super loud drum where, in fact, most of the Indian drums, they're kind of soft volume-wise in comparison to Western drums. Like if you played a bass drum and a snare drum next to a tabla or a mridangam, you're going to drown them out pretty easily.
Yeah.
But the Tavil they call an outdoor drum. It's like, because it's not an indoor drum, it's like made to be played loud outdoors, like, say, a marching snare drum. You play it with these like little thimbles on your fingertips and a stick with the left hand.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a double-headed drum, and it's like extremely loud. That was the teacher that there was a teacher that came to a drum camp I did in Germany in 2002. And he taught me the basics of the rhythms using conical. That was my way in. It was to learn, takadimi, 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 takatakita, takatakita, takatakatum, takadimi, takadum, takadimi, takatakatum, takadimi, takadum, dum, katakadina, dum, dum, takadum, like just getting into those syllables. And then I started practicing the rhythms. I could play the rhythms with my sticks, on a practice pad, figuring out stickings that I could use that would work with those kind of conical syllables. So I was starting to adapt my playing to playing those rhythms. For instance, that was one of the first things he taught me, and it was like a kind of a standard composition. And I could figure out stickings that would make that work and feel good, like kind of rudimental type stickings. So I just slowly went from there, practicing the conical, trying to figure out ways of playing those rhythms on the drums that mimicked the sound and the sound of the drums, and listening to, the mridangam players and kanjira players, and just slowly went from there. And then one day I thought, wonder if I can do the conical and play the drums at the same time.
Yeah.
And so it was like a very slow process of like, all right, I'll keep a beat and then do some conical on top of it.
Oh, sure. That's smart. Yeah.
And that was one idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then another idea is do the conical and double it with the drums. So it's like, in a way, two different concepts. One is keeping a groove and doing conical on top. Another is doubling it, and just so slowly went from there. So and then my studies jumped into overdrive when I started playing with Zakir Hussain in 2003 and actually recording and touring with him.
That's so wonderful that you were able to have such an experience with him. And I'm wondering if you can talk about your connection with him because I'm assuming he was a mentor.
Yes,
in
definitely.
many ways. And there are many videos of you online with him, and there's those Carnegie Hall videos where you guys are doing the workshops.
Yeah.
Can you talk just briefly about, and I can link out to other videos too where you've talked at length about some of this, but I'd love to hear about your relationship with Zakir.
I think really the first time I met him and played with him was those Yo Miles recordings. And that was before I had any kind of training on Indian rhythms. And so once that was 2000. So like I said, I started in 2002 with these kind of fundamental South Indian rhythms. And I learned them fast, like because I had good, let's say, rudimental type technique. I could figure out how to play these South Indian rhythms pretty quickly and then applying to the drum set, which caught the attention of George Brooks.
Oh, yeah.
And I played a gig with George Brooks with Larry Coryell. Like Larry was, he was like one of these jazz musicians. He was doing a jazz festival in the Bay Area and came without a band and hired a local rhythm section. So he hired me and George and Kai Eckhart.
Wow.
And we were his rhythm section. And that's, I think, how I met George and played with him for the first time. And I don't know that we must have been talking about Indian rhythms. So that was around that same time, 2003 or something. And then George started this group at Zakir called Summit and invited me and Kai Eckhart and Fareed Haq to play guitar. And we got together and rehearsed and played some gigs and made an album. It's a really excellent album. And then we started going on tour. The best way to describe it is that going on tour with Zakir was a constant masterclass in learning Indian rhythms.
Oh, I'm sure.
And it wasn't just me. Like we'd be on stage playing and we do these long drum solos.
Right.
And because I knew that a certain repertoire of South Indian korvais and, what's one of the names for these certain kind of rhythms, they would be like learning kind of standards. Like I learned some standard rhythmic compositions and he knew them. He, even though he's North Indian, he's very well versed in all the South Indian concepts as well.
Okay.
And so so that would be our meeting point.
Yeah.
We'd agree on those. And that's very much what he did with Shakti as well, because he would go to the South Indian repertoire to play with Viku or to play with Selva Ganesh. Those guys weren't going to the North and playing his repertoire. He was going to them and playing their concept and their repertoire. So we'd be on tour and waiting for an airplane, and he'd be teaching all, like me and George and Kai and Fareed, all of us, like different, try this out, and he'd give us the syllables and we'd all sort of be,
amazing,
getting into it. So it was like constant input.
Yes.
And he just took that role. He just naturally occupied that space of being a teacher because like we were all acolytes, beginners, and he was like the master.
Right.
But in his life, he was the master. It's almost no matter, I think, who he played with, he was the master. He just had that knowledge and that breadth of experience. Like he's probably the most well-versed drummer alive on the planet until rather recently, and so he was just incredible because with his training and background, he was able to easily absorb any other concept that he came in contact with. And I think largely due in some ways to Mickey Hart, because when he first came to the U.S., his father, Alla Rocca, hooked him up with Mickey Hart. Now think about that. It's like, oh, my 19-year-old son's coming to live in the U.S. I'm going to put him in the heart of the Grateful Dead zone. But he survived it. And he went to live with Mickey and then got exposed to, so many of these drummers that Mickey surrounded himself with when he did the Planet Drum Tour. Like, I did get to see that tour. It was cool. Airto, and Olatunji from Africa and Giovanni from Cuba or Puerto Rico. He's from Puerto Rico. But it was like, he was exposed to all of these world-class virtuosos, everyone top of their field. He just could get that. He was able to get that. Plus, of course, rock and roll and then jazz and all of it. So he was just a total inspiration to be with, and a funny guy. And then on stage with him, he was, no nonsense. Like, we'd have fun on stage, but if we had planned, we're going to do this composition, and he'd teach me something, and it would require like very precise playing, and especially like a big part of the Indian concept is this idea of gaps. Like, you play a rhythm and then you leave a gap, and then you play a rhythm and you leave a gap, and then you play the rhythm and it comes to one. Like, that would be like a basic formula for a T-high, where you repeat a particular rhythm 3 times. And then it comes to the one. And it's very important that the gap is perfectly correct. And whether it's, 2 beats, 3 beats, or 5 beats. Like, that would be, in some ways, for me, the trickiest part of those T-highs is like making sure the gap was right. Because you have to, in your mind, recite some kind of conical that you're not playing to make sure the gap is completely correct. So that would be like my stumbling block on some of these shows, and we'd be playing in front of 1,000 people, and then would come time for this, particular T-high to be played. And if I didn't play it right, he'd do it again.
Oh, really?
In front of everybody.
Oh, wow.
And so like there was a certain kind of pressure with that, but also it was okay. Like, it totally humbled me.
Sure.
To be in the presence of that. And then it got me to learn these ideas a lot quicker. Oh, yeah. Because it wasn't just theoretical. It wasn't just in the practice room.
Right.
It was like live on stage in front of people. And just to skip he wasn't the only one that did that. Then I played some of the gigs with Viku Vinayakram, and Viku did a similar thing. It was like part of their ideas. Like, okay, we picked him up at LAX to play a gig in Los Angeles, and in the van, he was teaching me this whole long sequence of rhythms that I had to memorize. And okay, we will play this tonight.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. That goes back to what you were talking about a little while ago with, you're practicing being inspired by something you maybe learned on a gig, but then you didn't have the gig again to try it out. And this sounds like every day. It was day after day.
It was.
Gig, maybe make a mistake, learn some more, fix it, try again.
And I want to say there's one other thing, or there's a lot of things I learned, but one other thing I learned from Zakir that was so interesting was there's an idea with drum solos, and especially with drum solos in a big room, or in a rock situation, that they have to be somehow entertaining in a way that's not necessarily musical. Anyway, it was an idea that I had, especially like from doing Journey drum solos. Like, I'd try my best to be musical, but also it would be somewhat of a spectacle as well. Yeah. But I saw Zakir night after night play these amazing solos. And I didn't know I'd be maybe the most rhythmically informed person in the room, and I didn't know what the hell he was doing. But it was mind-blowing. And it was mind-blowing for the entire audience, who, most of them didn't have any idea what he was doing, but you couldn't deny the virtuosity and the brilliance of it and the transcendence. Yes. Like, he would get to this place where he could transcend. Like, somehow the whole audience would go with him, which inspired me to then say, I'm going to go there and not be concerned with trying to do anything other than play at the highest level that I can possibly play at. And if I'm successful at that and I can bring the audience with me, I will. And in a way, it pushed me to a new place of being able to play solos that did move on and, did move audiences. And especially when I did this touring with Journey from 2016 to 2020, I played a drum solo every night. It was different every night. And I did my best to play the most interesting stuff for myself. And, and of course, wasn't obscure stuff. It had a groove, had a beat, and had virtuosity to it. And people responded amazingly to that. The Journey audience, would really go for it. So it didn't go over their heads somehow.
Yeah.
And I have to say it was inspired by Zakir to play and not be worried that a drum solo isn't going to communicate.
And now you're working on a book project. Is it a book project or a video project with Hudson now on some of this?
Yes, it's mainly going to be a book. I don't think it's going to be a video, though we haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
So it's a book about T-highs. So it's really focused on, in a way, being an encyclopedia of T-highs.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so it's not like a generalized Indian rhythm book, though there'll be some of that in there, but it's like just a thesaurus of T-highs.
Yeah.
And so most of the book is already written. Pete wrote this huge, 200 and something pages of all this theory and all of these T-highs, and he's recorded a lot of examples. But my part is how does that apply to the drum set? So I'm writing my interpretation of what he's already written and played. He played it on some hand percussion in some tracks, so you can hear it. It's not written for a tabla player or for any. It's general. It's for any musician could use it.
Okay.
And any kind of drummer can use these. So it's very general in its application, but in some ways more specific of how I play and what stickings I use to play them, to play the T-highs, to get them to sound convincing and usable in Western music.
And when is that project slated?
It's slated for whenever we finish it. We're
Fair.
working on it in a bit of a relaxed way, but, I'm hoping in the next year.
Okay, cool.
Maybe a year from now.
Okay, cool.
But we're pretty far along with it. It's hard for me to get to it every day because certain days I'm working on other things,
Sure.
I'm getting ready for a tour. Lately, what I've been working on, and I just want to bring this up because it's been what I've been focused on for the last couple of weeks, is Sonar is celebrating 150 years. And they organized Jack DeJohnette and I to get into a studio together to do some playing together.
Oh, wow.
And to talk about Sonar drums together.
Amazing.
And so we've done that. And now, I did an hour-long interview with Jack, which turned into a conversation, essentially.
Sure.
That we're editing that with including some playing examples. So that's been a lot of work to really get that all sequenced and organized.
Oh, I can't wait to check that out.
It's going to be good.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know we've already gone over what I said we wanted to do, and I can't thank you enough for your time. I just have a couple of quick questions that I want to ask as sort of wrap-up questions. The first one is, I'm curious what album that you've listened to more than any other in your lifetime, and maybe one or two albums is fine. Is there anything that jumps out as albums you keep going back to?
That's a good question, and it has to do with different eras of my life.
Sure.
At first, I listened to Rich versus Roach.
Oh, yeah.
Hundreds of times, back when I was in high school.
Yeah.
When I first discovered that album. And then I come up with the idea, in 1983 on tour with Journey on the Frontiers tour, I had the newly released Keith Jarrett Trio Standards Volume 1 and 2 on cassette.
Oh, yeah.
That I listened to over and over and over again. And the other album that I listened to over and over again at that time was Visions of the Emerald Beyond. Mahavishnu Orchestra with Narada Michael Walden. So those records I listened to like hundreds of times. Now, as of late, I can't say there's anything like that, but, so much of my life now revolves around spending time with my wife, Diane, and us organizing a day that just feels great for us. Like we have a relaxed morning breakfast, then I work in the middle of the day, she works in the middle of the day, and then we get together at night and cook and hang out. So we play music, but most of the music we play, it's like solo piano, or like Keith Jarrett and Charlie Hayden, that album, or Richie Byrack, Volume 1 and Volume 2, like of jazz standards.
Oh, sure.
It's a great album. Brad Meldau, Ballads and Blues, or like his solo piano album that he played all the Beatles songs.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very nice an atmosphere for us to just kind of hang and chill.
Yeah.
Or the other ones like we listened to this morning is Something Else by Cannonball Adderley.
Oh, yeah.
And then it goes hand in hand with Kinda Blue and Chet, this Chet Baker album just called Chet, where it's like super chill album. So that kind of like that, we play that in the house and
okay, cool.
And chill out. Yeah.
Finally, I'm curious if you have any hobbies or obsessions outside of music.
Not really. I mean, I cook every day.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm the chef in the family for the most part, so that's interesting.
Oh, nice.
And I read a lot, and I read novels and biographies and all kinds of different stuff. So we spend time, every day, most days, reading. That's like an activity, actually.
Oh, nice.
And so, yeah. But, and then we try to stay in shape and do some, yoga and workout and different things and walk a lot and just try to keep ourselves healthy as well.
Speaking of reading, real quick, have you read Billy Hart's autobiography yet?
No, I don't think I even know about it.
I'll hold it up here.
Oceans of Time. Nice.
Ethan Iverson worked with him on this. It is fantastic.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I can't tell you how awesome it was to talk to you, and
my pleasure.
It means the world. So I'll put links to everything in the show notes so people can keep up with you. And with that, I'll just say thanks again, and we'll talk later.
Okay, Craig. Thank you, man. We'll talk later.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please subscribe on your platform of choice and share it with a friend. You can find the show and a blog at practicingdrummer.com or on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram as Practicing Drummer.